Kia hora te marino kia whakapapapaunamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Umi e hui e tae ki e. Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi mai o haki a koutou, kua tai mai nei ki te tautoko te kaupapa o tēnei rā. No mai, haere mai, I'm Moira Clooney. I'm project lead for Te Ngākau Kahukura and part of the project team for Making Space. Welcome to some familiar names and to others I haven't met yet. We've had more than 200 people register for today's session. So welcome to those who are joining live or who are watching the recording of the session later. You'll meet others from our project team through this session, but first of all, I'm going to share a bit of context about this project, why we're working on this kaupapa and the approach that we're taking. If you've got a question for me or the team at any time, through the session, please put it in the Q&A area of Zoom. That'll help us see it. And also feel free to use the chat function. So feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, share any reflections or thoughts about what you're hearing as we go. So on the next slide, today we're talking about Making Space, which is a collaboration led by Te Ngākau Kahukura and Rainbow Youth around addressing homelessness in the Rainbow, LGBTI+, Takatapui, MVP, queer, trans and intersex communities. Ending homelessness, of course, is a huge take that is going to take time and effort from a whole range of people, from lots of you who are on the call today. Likewise, even if we're just thinking about rainbow homelessness, that's a really complex challenge. So this particular project is just looking at one aspect of that. We're aiming, as it says on the screen, to build capacity within homelessness and housing services in Tamaki Makaurau to provide safe, non-discriminatory and accessible services for rainbow people. We want to improve services so that we can improve the experiences of rainbow people accessing those services. And then in the longer term, we're hoping that we'll see that result in a positive shift around how rainbow people talk about services to each other. So start to shift the narratives around what it means to access housing support or to access homelessness services, which in turn means that it's easier for rainbow people to get support with housing when they need it. The next slide just introduces our project team. So we bring a whole range of skills and perspectives to this kaupapa. Nick Simons leads this work. Nick has worked in homelessness and rainbow service design and delivery and is a really staunch advocate for lived experience voices in particular. My work with Te Ngākau Kahukura is around systems change to make environments and services safer and more accessible, more affirming for rainbow people generally. I have a background in public health, especially around mental health and suicide prevention. Pooja is the Executive Director of Rainbow Youth and has also done a whole lot of work in the violence prevention sector as well. Nehana was the homelessness support worker at Rainbow Youth. He stepped into a different role now, but has a huge amount of direct experience supporting rainbow young people to access services when they are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Taiko is our subject matter expert. They're not always comfortable with that term, but doing great academic work in this space. So Taiko's PhD that they're currently working on is around trans and gender diverse experiences of homelessness in Aotearoa. Sarah is our project evaluator. Sarah's done a huge amount of work in evaluation across the housing, homelessness and mental health spaces for a number of years. And Francis is our design expert leading this process. So Francis works at Deloitte, but has also worked and volunteered in rainbow support spaces, so has really deep understanding of this kaupapa in this community as well. You'll hear from Nick and Francis soon, and you might see other names in the chat as well. That's who we all are. So moving on to the next slide, also wanted to acknowledge our funders. So extremely grateful for the opportunity to do a concentrated piece of work on this kaupapa. Homelessness in rainbow spaces is something that our community organisations have known about and been working on for a number of years, but this is really the first time that central government has recognised the work at this sort of level. So we've had some great support from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Te Tuapapa Kura Kāinga, through their Local Innovation and Partnership Fund. Also from Auckland Council, who've done some really leading work in sort of policy, and research in this space, and who supported the establishment of Rainbow Youth's homelessness support worker a few years ago, and also from Foundation North, who are wonderful support for our communities and have a strategic focus on social inclusion, which includes thinking about how that applies to Rainbow communities. The next slide is just to briefly talk about why we're working on this. So from existing research in Aotearoa and overseas, and from our experience working with communities, we know that Rainbow people of all ages actually are more likely to experience homelessness and housing insecurity, more likely to experience those things more often and for longer. And the reasons for this are really complex. So when we talk about rainbow homelessness, people often think about kids coming out to their parents and being kicked out of home. And that's certainly part of it, that issue of conflict and rejection. But it is more complex than that, and it relates to discrimination that we experience in different ways across housing, education, welfare, employment settings, higher rates of poverty and economic instability, higher rates of substance use and mental health difficulties to do with minority stress and discrimination. And we know that there's documented discrimination in the rental market as well. So these are factors that kind of multiply as well when we're thinking about rainbow people who are disabled, or rainbow people who are Māori or Pacific in particular, or who are migrants or come from a refugee or asylum seeking background. So the issues around what leads to rainbow homelessness are complex. And then we also know that when people are experiencing homelessness, rainbow people are less likely to be seeking help or support than their non-rainbow peers. And so that's to do with fear of rejection, violence, victimisation, expecting to receive a bad service or to not be understood. And it's also to do with experiences of those things, unfortunately. So unsafe environments in some services, and a lack of support within services for rainbow affirming practice and competence. So that's a brief introduction to the research. We have a research brief that we'll share with you as well. But just looking at our particular project, we really want to make change on this issue, of course. We really, as a team, invested in this kaupapa beyond the idea of being funded to do a project for a couple of years. This is something that affects our community, our whānau, our friends. And we really want to do this in a way that works. So we've taken a really participatory approach. We know that services are really stretched. They often don't have a lot of time for extra staff training or capacity building. We know that doing a single workshop and then taking off again isn't going to be the answer. We know having a PDF of some guidelines that sit on our website that staff don't have time to read isn't going to be the answer. And we, in terms of rainbow people who have their own lived experience, we want to make sure that what we're developing really addresses their needs and challenges, that it's not sort of a generic awareness raising project about rainbow identities, that it really can engage with people's experience of homelessness and of trying to access support for housing as well. So we've been informed by kind of co-design approaches. This diagram comes from K.A. McKercher's book, Beyond Sticky Notes, which has been really useful for us. We've been working with rainbow people who have their own lived experience of homelessness, as well as with the sector really widely, so talking to stakeholders in government, but also frontline service workers and managers within services. This isn't really a fully co-design project as such. We've come into it with a predetermined kind of focus area and time frame. We're not being completely led by priorities of people with lived experience, but we're following participatory processes and human-centered design principles. And the book too, Beyond Sticky Notes, has some great thinking around involving marginalised or disadvantaged groups of people and thinking about power dynamics within those processes. The next slide just speaks to our approach, which has had to change a few times because of COVID actually. So initially was going to involve a lot more in-person hui, a lot more opportunities for whanaungatanga and working together in person, and that changed and shifted. We had to kind of rethink the approach. Where we've landed is with this more concentrated design process that's seen us complete a discovery phase over the last sort of 6 weeks or so. As I was saying, interviewing sector stakeholders within government, interviewing service providers and people with lived experience. We've used that insight to refine our focus and to define the opportunities that we see for making change. And we're just about to move into the design part of the process. So we've got some ideation sessions next week, which will start exploring different ways to meet those opportunities. Then we'll be looking at prototyping and testing, piloting a solution from around May. And after that, we have about a year of the current project funding to keep delivering, learning and developing. And through that time, we'll be looking to see the best place to fit this work within our existing operations and how we resource it for the future as well. The next slide, as part of our discovery phase, we undertook a literature review. So looking at some of the research context around local and international research, as well as some examples of how services overseas have addressed these challenges. And the knowledge brief that's up on the screen is available to read now. So that's on our website, making-space.nz. And we'll email a link through to participants afterwards as well. I'd like to now hand over to Frances and Nix to share some of our insights from the interviews. As a reminder, if you have any questions for these two or for me or for our team in general, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A so that we can see them more easily. And I can see that people have been adding some thoughts and introductions in the chat, so please continue to do that. And pass over to Nix and Frances. Kia ora.
Cool. Kia ora koutou. We'll go to the next slide if possible. So kia ora koutou. I'm Nicole Nix-Simons. I'm the homelessness lead for Te Ngaka Kahukura. So I'll just be providing an overview of our approach. So over the last 6 weeks, we've dedicated our time to inviting Rainbow Takatapui, people with lived experience of homelessness, key stakeholders and sector leaders across the housing and homelessness sector in Auckland to participate in empathy-led one-on-one interviews with the aim to hear their experiences, fears, hopes and dreams for rainbow responsiveness in the housing sector. As we speak to providers in the context of this work, it's important to note that we are referencing NGO service providers as well as government agencies. So our initial approach and vision, as Moira explained, was to hold in-person workshops to co-design, but we've needed to demonstrate flexibility, be adaptive to working in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've been really determined to create a design process that engages with a wide range of lived experience voices and organisations across the sector in a way that enables us to capture the reality of what people are experiencing in a really authentic manner, despite our not being able to sit in hui face to face, and also working alongside a sector that is quite stretched capacity-wise. So that's led to us conducting most of our interviews online and some in person where necessary. So across the interviews over the last 6 weeks, we've engaged with 8 lived experience participants with a range of intersecting identities and housing and homelessness service experiences. 6 people working in service delivery roles as key workers or in a team leader position, and 7 leaders within NGO service provider and government agencies. Part of our approach has been embedding significant time in building relationships or connecting into existing relationships across the sector to find the right person or representatives from these organisations and agencies that share an interest in what we've set out to develop in collaboration with them. Alongside these incredible contributions from the 21 empathy-led interviews, our research has, as Moira said, drawn upon the knowledge of our knowledge brief and the expertise within our project team that comprise a mixture of lived experience and provider experience. We've also ensured that we've engaged with and developing an evaluation framework throughout our process, and we're actively setting time aside for reflective practice. I just wanted to note before we move on that through the interview process, we have held half of the lived experience interviews online and half of them have been in person due to differences in access to technology, stable internet, safe environments to share their experiences, and personal comfort and preference. So And then it's been really important for us to spend time thinking creatively, being flexible when inviting people with lived experience to contribute, and always returning to and asking ourselves, are we creating as many entry points as possible for collaboration? Are they leading us and finding ways to make those meetings work for them? And are these voices at the center of what we're doing? And I'll likely speak to more of our lived experience engagement process and our learnings later in the project development. But for now, I just really wanted to take the moment to acknowledge every single person who's contributed to this project so far. I've been really deeply moved by the powerful vulnerability, honesty, and willingness that has been shared with us as a project team. So thank you. I'll hand over to Frances to kick us off with introducing our findings.
Kia ora, thanks, Nix. I also just want to acknowledge before I start talking about our findings, which Nix wouldn't say about themselves, but Nix's experience in the sector and deep relationships that they hold, both with people with lived experience and across agencies, and like the mana that they hold in the sector has actually been such a key enabler to this project. And there's absolutely no way that we would have been able to get such vulnerable and deep insight and stories from the folks that we've spoken to without those relationships. So yeah, just want to kind of acknowledge that as like a key part of how this project has been able to succeed alongside the generosity of those folks who've shared. So what you're looking at on the screen is what we've found so far as we're kind of delving into this like rich data that we have gathered through our one-on-one interviews. So as you can see at the top, we've synthesized over 700 data points from those interviews into 54 findings and 13 insights that span 4 key themes across this kaupapa. So the first theme is that housing and homelessness services are generally perceived negatively within rainbow communities. That obviously has an impact on kind of the likelihood and willingness of folks to access services, and in some ways can be, I guess, kind of like a cyclical issue where folks are having negative experiences, and that's contributing to that narrative as well. So the second kind of key theme we have is that providers demonstrate real care for service users and often don't have the tools to provide a service experience that aligns to that intention and desire. So we heard really strongly from providers that, you know, that heart-led approach that exists across the sector and a real desire to serve this population and these communities well, our communities well, but just struggling without the tools and resourcing to be able to do that. The third theme that we have here is that rainbow people face discrimination and violence in this space, and often, unfortunately, aren't being protected by services. So we are going to share a few of these stories shortly, but certainly it has been, I guess, quite devastating for us to hear some of the experiences that lived experience participants, rainbow identified people, are having, both in services, but also trying to access services. So I think that's been a big part of what we've heard. And finally, I think on a really optimistic and kind of forward-looking note, the sector has recognised the need for change and is optimistic about collaborating to improve equity. So we'll talk a little bit more about that point shortly, but I think, sorry, could we just go back, Pooja? Thank you. I'll just give a bit of intro to that slide before we get into it. I think just a key point to acknowledge is that the sector is really keen for this change and recognises the need here, but also the need to collaborate, and that actually we need to work together to be able to move forward, which is fantastic. So just before we move on to the next slide, I guess I just wanted to acknowledge I am going to be sharing some firsthand experiences from both a lived experience participant, but also stories that providers have shared with us from, I guess, of what's happened to lived experience participants. And it is quite heavy. So I know that like the project team's been quite kind of emotionally moved by some of these stories, and we wanted to share with you, I guess, what the really pointy end of some of this kind of violence and discrimination that is happening looks like. So I kind of wanted to give you a heads up of that before we speak to that, but also I guess just encourage you to kind of take some space for yourself and make sure you look after yourself after the session, because it is quite heavy content. So we can move into that. Thank you, Pooja. Okay, so I'm just gonna read out these experiences, and I encourage you to just kind of share any reflections or comments in the chat if you're so inclined. So starting on the left, it's things like deactivating swipes of Rainbow tenants to not allow access, or when visitors come, stopping visitors coming through, but not to anyone else. Then when this happens, the person then gets a little annoyed and worked up, but that behavior is because of the action taken before that. They, the kind of building or tenancy manager, will then film the person doing this stuff and say, they're such a bad person and we need to get them out. So I guess just for the context, that's the building or kind of tenancy manager targeting Rainbow tenants and kind of aggravating them, and then using that as evidence for why they should be evicted. The next one to the right here, I've been dead named by almost every single service provider that I've met. Some have gone to making sure that this is my name. I guess that they have a legal obligation, but then they dead name and say, that's your legal name and that's what I'm going to call you. In this situation, they called me in and asked me, is this you, dead name? I said, yes, but I preferred to be called name. She said, no, I'm not seeing any name here. I'll be calling you by dead name. The lady was like, is this how you speak to everyone? She said, if this is how you talk to everyone, then I'll be hanging up the call and you'll be homeless. She was saying, oh, I like dead name. That's a nice name. So I understand they have a legal obligation to say, is this your legal name? But I wanted to be called this. The entire conversation was centering around her, the provider. She threatened to make me homeless. She was going to hang up and put in the notes that I didn't answer the call. So I had to bite my tongue and just have the conversation. The last story here that we wanted to share from a service provider. I do see some quite discriminatory behaviour by some members of the sector, like the number of transitional housing providers that have just flatly refused to take transgender service users, for example. And, you know, some still insist on having segregated areas, and kind of their definition of genders might leave a little bit to be desired. And that's certainly kind of the piece around gendered facilities is absolutely something that we've heard service users are really struggling with when trying to access affirming and safe housing, which will come through in more detail in the insights documentation.
All right, thanks, Frances. It's always hard hearing those. So I just wanted to take some time to reflect on what we've learned from the sector and look at our key findings around what's happening for providers in this space. So many providers have been sharing with us that this is a conversation that they should be having with their service users, but they don't know how to navigate it. There was definitely a common fear of getting it wrong or saying something that might offend a Rainbow service user, and at times this was stopping providers from engaging in the conversation at all. We also heard that Rainbow service users are often seen as an avenue to learning about Rainbow identities and experiences, which has led to service users feeling that they're in a difficult position by having to educate providers while seeking services. So, and that can be applied to not using dead names, the importance of the right, pronouns, language being used, even educating providers to why certain housing solutions aren't safe. And those are just a few examples. Providers also spoke of their desire for tools and resources to support them when they're working with Rainbow service users, and how difficult it is for them to currently find any information. Let's go to the next slide. So as we're looking across our insights and findings, we wanted to highlight some key reflections for the sector. Many service providers proudly shared that they treat everyone the same, regardless of gender or sexuality, and saw this as evidence of equity in their services. Although it's an applaudable perspective, it does demonstrate a lack of awareness of the different needs and approaches that Rainbow Identity can require, and brings into focus the equality versus equity dilemma, where a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for Rainbow service users. Our second reflection is that at times where Rainbow identities were recognised, service users felt that their Rainbow identity was treated as the root cause of their homelessness, and some providers struggled to see their needs and who they were beyond that aspect of their identity. So in some stories we heard that not all Rainbow people were experiencing homelessness because of their Rainbow identity, and instead outline many other leading factors in their lives that led to homelessness. And lastly, we heard service users speaking of having to weigh up how much dysphoria they might experience in services versus how unsafe other options might be, such as couch surfing or rough sleeping. Dysphoria being the discomfort or distress that a person can feel when there's incongruity between their body and their gender or sense of self, or when their friends, whānau, or others do not see them as the gender they identify with. I've included a wider definition that's really important to understand from gender minorities, Aotearoa, on the slides there too. So that wraps up our key reflections for the sector for now. If there's anything else you wanted to add, Frances, or we can... Yeah, we've moved to the next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot more there, but we'll look forward to sharing that with everyone when we release that insights documentation later this month. Thanks, Nix. So I guess acknowledging the heaviness and complexity and challenges ahead, we are really optimistic about doing this work together. And I think going back to, the really strong appetite and excitement that we heard from everyone that we've spoken to in the sector, both people that we have interviewed and people that Nix has connected with as part of, I guess, progressing this kaupapa. And it has been really encouraging to feel that support and just really strong interest in doing this work and recognition of the need to collaborate. So I think there's just a couple of quotes here that I felt really spoke to that appetite, that excitement, that willingness to go on this journey together. So looking ahead, we can go to the next slide, Pooja, thank you. We thought it would be great to share some of the key opportunities that we've identified, and acknowledging that we still are in the process of finalising our insights and what the opportunities are that we have uncovered. We thought it would be useful to share some of the things that have already come up. So thinking about rainbow responsiveness and what a solution or solutions could look like for organisations across the homelessness and housing sectors, we've identified 7 key opportunities. The first one is to support providers to build trusted relationships with service users, including building confidence to have conversations about rainbow identities. So one of the things that we've heard is a really key part of any positive service experience comes back to the relationship that a rainbow service user had with their key worker or their support worker. So we know that's a really key part of the equation, and we want to support providers to build those trusted relationships and to provide the confidence for them to steer into those conversations about rainbow identities, despite possibly not having that lived experience themselves. The second one, which I think speaks to both our approach and any solutions that we develop, is to centre lived experience in a meaningful and ongoing way. So recognising that the human connection and the stories that you hear is such a huge part of being able to empathize and connect with service users and people from different communities and backgrounds to yourself, but also recognizing that in the way that we develop this program or solution and how it continues to evolve and develop over time beyond the scope of this kind of initial design process, it's really important that lived experience has a voice in shaping and guiding that. The third opportunity we see is to enable providers to go beyond satisfying needs. So kind of thinking from a safety perspective and to actually support and add value in other areas of Rainbow service users' lives. So recognizing that often providers will be supporting their service users in housing, but also in other kind of related areas, equipping providers to be able to do that for Rainbow service users in that same way. So thinking about things like accessing gender affirming healthcare, supporting with kind of name changes and like legal documentation around that. We see heaps of opportunity to kind of to solve for the safety stuff, but then to be able to be like, okay, but where to from here? How can we actually contribute and add to the lives of our Rainbow service users? The fourth opportunity is around supporting organisations with responsiveness in a really broad sense. So thinking beyond kind of support worker training, which I think is naturally where a lot of our kind of thinking goes when we are talking about capability or competency building, but actually recognising to achieve the kind of transformation that's needed and really embedding Rainbow responsiveness within organisations. We want to look for opportunities kind of across the organisation in addition to the kind of support workers as well. The fifth opportunity we see is to provide learning and tools in a way that doesn't add to already heavy caseloads. So recognising that the sector is incredibly stretched and under a lot of pressure from a delivery perspective. And looking ahead, you know, there's not really any indication of that slowing down. So we don't want to add to that load. We want this to be a positive and useful thing for the sector. And also recognising, you know, the different learning and engagement styles. So it's a very diverse workforce. There are folks from different kind of academic and theoretical backgrounds, as well as folks that come from more of a lived experience or peer support background. And within that is also huge diversity. So recognizing that we want to have an approach that caters to those different needs. Opportunity 6 is around equipping providers to gather data on Rainbow service users and their experiences. So this is a real gap that we saw through the research and that we are probably all well aware of. We really lack data around the presence of Rainbow service users in services of all kinds, but also what we heard is that, you know, providers were often unable to speak to what the experiences of Rainbow service users were in their organisations and what their outcomes were like in comparison to their peers, which makes it really difficult to, I mean, firstly, monitor the ongoing effectiveness of any solutions, but also to make sure that there is, that we are addressing inequity and seeing it when it's there. Finally, we see a real opportunity to take an intersectional approach. So making sure that our solution isn't siloed from other programs of work addressing equity issues in services. And we're aware of work many providers spoke about work they're doing in the cultural responsiveness space, particularly around support for Māori and Pasifika communities. They also spoke about support for disabled service users. And we think it's really important that we are kind of joined up in intersectional our approach rather than adding another work program that's kind of siloed off and treating Rainbow communities as separate from those other communities when actually there is a lot of crossover and connection. We identified a couple of opportunities that are beyond kind of the scope of this work, but we felt were really important to share. And the first one is to reset Rainbow perceptions of services and make it easier to find out about, access and navigate services. So kind of looping back to that piece around the perceptions of the perceptions within rainbow communities of homelessness services. And I guess, we see one of the outcomes longer term of this project being to start to influence those narratives within communities. But there's probably also something from a provider side to think about how they can reset and disrupt that narrative, obviously with the action to support it. The second opportunity we see is to support organisations in the sector to translate strategic government priorities around rainbow communities into action. And as many of us would have noticed, there is increasingly recognition and acknowledgement of rainbow communities in many government documents and policies, and you'd hear it being spoken about at that very high level, which is fantastic. And as we were talking to organisations, we felt and heard that kind of gap in terms of how to translate that priority into action, and kind of tangible tools for organisations to take that high level aspiration and turn it into actions kind of on the ground and within their organisation. So obviously this project is going to be doing that, and there's I guess opportunity kind of more broadly to think about how that could happen as well. That's us, I think, on the findings for now.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Frances and Nix. If you want to pop your cameras back on, if you're happy to answer questions, that would be great. We've had a few questions come through the Q&A section. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in there. But just to start with, I wondered if I could ask both of you, what have you found most challenging about this process so far?
I can kick us off next. I think there's probably a couple of things that come to mind. I think firstly, like I'll be honest, it has been quite emotionally intense. And I think hearing the stories, both from like lived experience participants, but also from the providers, has been quite full on and quite draining, and particularly because we did a lot of these interviews back to back, it just felt like this kind of huge weight of all of the challenges, and knowing, yes, we're doing something, but also there's like all this need that exists like right now, and feeling frustrated and annoyed, to be honest. And I guess the counter to that has been our like really supportive approach within the team, and I think having the space to like have these conversations and to be honest about how it affects you as someone who, not having kind of lived experience of homelessness, but being able to relate to a lot of the challenges around identity and experiences of discrimination from our lived experience participants, I think, is a thing.
Cool, thank you. I'll just weigh in on that around, I guess it has been a challenge. I think the relationship building, for a project that's as in depth as this, so has been both a really interesting part of this process, and it has definitely been, I think we struggled at the start to get enough rainbow, lived experience participants, which really I feel speaks to the difficulty of engaging in that population, especially in our unique pandemic circumstance. So I feel that we've really had to just trust the process, and I think it's been interesting to note that we've really relied on a lot of existing relationships, trust that's been formed over a really long period of time, and also a shout out to the other participants that have helped us like connect to others who might be interested as well. So it's one for me.
Thank you. Nehana, did you want to add anything about what you find challenging about this work? I don't want to put you on the spot, but just if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think as working as the previous homelessness worker and then also having lived experience in this area, it's always hard hearing those stories from our young people in our communities. That's always probably the hardest part, I would have to say. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do any of you have anything that's hopeful or uplifting to share?
You go, Hannah.
Oh no, you go.
I think the most like hopeful and uplifting thing for me is just hearing the sentiment from providers about, you know, like supporting this kaupapa and wanting to go on this journey together, but also seeing it, you know, having providers connect us in with lots of other people, seeing, you know, over 220 people register for this webinar and the huge amount of interest and support that there is feels really positive and exciting. I think that the time is right. And yeah, the ingredients and like foundations are there for this work, which I feel really excited about.
Yeah, I just really wanted to talk with that and have spoken to, I guess maybe the way that we've conducted this, but that willingness, the vulnerability in that sharing has been incredible. And I think being able to create a space where people can share so openly and honestly, even when we are talking about things that are really horrible, that do create a lot of discomfort, being able to hold space for that, sit in that, and really acknowledge all the different levels that we're working with in this project. So I think it's a very complex space to be working in. It's not simple when we're thinking about the vastness and the complexity of all the different types of housing structures around us. So yeah, I'm feeling hopeful based on mostly that. And then I just am really looking forward to deepening what we're learning and the collaboration that's going to come.
Yeah, I just want to also try to talk to both of you in that, like, I feel absolutely hopeful, knowing one that we have like over 130 people here watching right now. Kia ora to all of you for coming today, and to know that like we have, you know, like relationships with these organizations who want to do better and know more and all those types of things, and that those things make me absolutely hopeful every day that the work will get better for our younger people. So kia ora. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Lots of love for Nix in the chat in terms of their work and existing relationships across the sector. And there was a question following on from that acknowledgement around Nix's ability in particular to build relationships that enable people to share deeply. What did you observe as the key things for others wanting to build similar trusting connections? Or what thoughts do you have around how people can work with people with lived experience in an authentic way? Nix, did you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, cool. What a great question. I'll speak to both the sector relationships, but also lived experience. I feel for me, I think there's sometimes can underestimate the amount of time that you need in terms of building those relationships. So I am very grateful to my existing relationships, but that we've actually been able to build in extra time and really honor the process that it's taken to getting the right people in the room, the right people to talk to, the right people that are invested. So I highly recommend anyone who's working in this kind of space is to make sure that you build in that time. I guess trust takes time to build. So I've done a lot of whanaungatanga with people, both in the sector and of course with lived experience. So a lot of my time has been into getting to know people, but also people getting to know me. I feel like trust really comes from that. So making sure I put time aside for prep meetings, creating spaces for people to ask questions ahead of time, getting really clear on what we're asking, what we're trying to create together. I think something that's been really key to this project has been making sure that people know that there are no wrong answers. I guess in a design process like this, it's really about understanding people's insights and experiences as they are, and that there really isn't judgment in that space. Yeah, so and of course, like consistency and communication. So yeah, I put a lot of time into keeping up with people and keeping people in the loop as much as possible, especially around like the next steps and just taking people through that journey. In terms of the lived experience participants, you know, it's been really important to make sure that we have as many entry points as possible in terms of the ways that they can contribute, you know, and stay involved in the development of the project, and really keep asking myself, like, where possible are they leading us, you know, and finding ways forward in this, and definitely making sure that we pay them appropriately for their time and expertise. That is so important, and making sure that you are being flexible and willing to meet them where they're at. I think, you know, these are such valuable voices, and it's really important that we're not sort of making them bend to our way, if that makes sense. So providing opportunities to join in the Zooms, in the meetings, but like being super flexible. I've had to go to people, you know, I've had to go to where they live. I've had to be in their spaces to build that trust. So it's really about making sure that they have choices and options, and like knowing that no one style works in that space. It's really about understanding that person and being responsive to that. So yeah, and then just making sure that they know that there's someone that they can check in with, and making sure you're doing checkups, and especially when we're holding content that is very distressing, you know, and bringing up past experiences, and making sure that there's access to support. So yeah, and lastly, both in lived experience and across the sector, making sure that the door is always open. You know, the timing is such a funny thing. People have a passion, right, a real interest to be part of this work, and sometimes when we're sticking with timelines and like deliverables on dates, it's kind of like that need to be flexible, the need to keep the door open so that you're ready to take opportunities as they arise, and let people contribute when the timing's right. So there you go, it's my insight.
Sure. Thank you so much, yeah, for your leadership in this space as well. Really good insights. Looking through the questions, there's been a whole range. A few about demographics and data, and I might just answer this one myself, which is someone who works at Oranga Tamariki wants to know, from the data collected, can we advise what the percentage of the homeless rainbow community is under the age of 18? And I just wanted to ask that question to acknowledge that we don't know that, and I think that that's a big issue in this space generally, that many of you will be aware of. We don't really know the size of the homeless community in Aotearoa. There isn't good data on the size of that population as a whole, and across most of the research that's done, there's not, we don't ask about rainbow identities or rainbow populations, and so that's not captured. So we don't have lots of homelessness data, we have very little rainbow homelessness data, and within that don't really know about how that breaks down across demographics and ages. There's been some fantastic rainbow-led research, things like the Identify survey that's run from the University of Auckland. I think Dr. John Finnerty was on this call. The Counting Ourselves research from the University of Waikato that looks at trans and non-binary experiences. So there's great insights coming through from the community side of things, and also we're starting to see Stats New Zealand integrate rainbow questions into the Housing and Economic Survey and into the next census as well, actually. So we will start to see more data around housing emerge in terms of rainbow populations, but that's really limited at the moment. So just acknowledging that. Lots of questions around intersectionality and different groups within the rainbow population. I just ask this one. Rainbow is such a useful collective term in so many ways, but it does contain so much. This person wonders if anyone in the team has any reflections about how to consider the complexities of improving housing services for particularly trans, intersex and Takatapui people, maybe thinking about other minorities within rainbow populations as well. Who wants to tackle that one?
I think we should all say something about this one in the spirit of intersectionality. And I'm happy to start. This is a very timely question. Some of the feedback that or challenge that Taiko gave us on the insights documentation was that we're kind of at risk of homogenizing rainbow experiences, and the importance of pulling through the threads around where there are a rainbow identity alongside other identities, as there are for all of us. And I think we've got some really rich insights from our research around that, and we're lucky to have had quite a diverse group of lived experience participants as well. I think that any solution we design will need to take into account those different needs and be responsive to, not kind of rainbow identities as this homogenous group, but actually taking into account the nuances and requirements for different communities. And I think for me, it comes back to how we can integrate across other programs of work that are happening within organizations around other kind of equity related issues or marginalized communities. And I think that's something we need to steer into as we move into our design phase.
Next one, Hannah, or I can jump in with a thought.
Very small. Oh, sorry.
You go. You go.
Oh, just a very small thing around that I will always advocate for further consultation, and collaboration. With different people. So I think we need to be really open about how we bring different identities along with us, and that, I guess, this kind of speaks to the one size fits all approach just doesn't work. So and I feel that we're definitely holding that at the forefront of as we're going through this design challenge. Yeah, that was one little extra thought.
Yeah, kia ora. I feel the same. Like, I think that there are so many complexities to our young people that are coming through, and that we can be responsive to those complexities as well as they come through. Yeah, that's my small bit.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add too, in terms of the question, thinking about trans, intersex and takatapui populations, that one of the big issues I think we've heard coming through is around not only having kind of awareness and good relational skills and things, but also the ways in which a lot of services are based around gender. So, so people might be placed in certain houses or flatting situations based on their perceived gender or their legal documentation, and so those can be particular issues of safety and comfort and accessibility, particularly for trans people, but also I think would affect intersex people as well. So I think that that's an issue that that differs from kind of the broader rainbow population. Thanks everyone for your thoughts. That's a big question and lots to think about, I'm sure. Another really great question that came through was just, did any of you have comments to make about the role of lived experience, employment or peer approaches in this space? Nix, I know that's been part of your work in previous roles.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think something that's definitely come through and that I'll always advocate for as well is the visibility of rainbow takatapui people in those spaces. So both in design and delivery, but making sure that there are more staff, that are visible in those spaces. We definitely heard a lot of stories around that would be something that would help get people in the door as well. So I just kind of wanted to speak to that, and I feel that we can never have enough emphasis on making sure that lived experiences everywhere throughout an organization, so it's being informed at every level. So absolutely, in terms of employment opportunities.
Oh, thank you. And I think, there are a few questions in there too around how this work might grow out into other spaces, into smaller centres outside of Auckland, into other sectors, whether what we learn might be applicable across other service systems like health, and also how we might link this with other similar sorts of issues that the housing sector is grappling with around cultural competency and accessibility and things. And I think those are all really fantastic questions, and I think we are really open to thinking about how we broaden this out as well beyond this project. But that's probably as much time as we have for questions. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts and questions and reflections coming through. Just to briefly speak to the next steps around this project. We are just finalising, as Francis has been talking about, that documentation around the insights that we've had from our interviews. That'll be kind of finished this week, and we'll be distributing the knowledge brief and webinar recording to you today or tomorrow by email. Those insights from the interviews will be published later on this month. We're looking to start holding those ideation sessions next week and start to explore what are people's kind of ideas about how we might look to address some of those opportunities, then look to validate some of those insights with the people that we've interviewed, develop prototypes of some of the ideas that come through and test those with people in the sector and with our lived experience participants, and then refine that, turn it into a pilot, start to deliver it, see what we can learn. And I think, as I said earlier, we've got another kind of year of resourcing after this to keep learning and refining and figuring out how we take this forward into the future. So throughout this process, there'll be lots of opportunities for you to engage with this as well if you're interested in learning more or in contributing to our thinking. And thank you so much for being with us today. As the slide says, we'd really welcome your feedback or any other questions. Anything we didn't get to today, do feel free to get in touch with Nix or to have a look at our website, making-space.nz. And we'll share, as I said, the recording of this session after today. Thank you so much for being here, all of you, and thank you to the team for your thoughts and insights and for answering people's questions. Kia ora, and we'll just close as we started with the karakia. So, me karakia tātou. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te urutapunui, kia wātia, kia mama, te māpau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takata. Koe ara e rongo whakaere ake ki runga kia tina, tina, huie, taiki. Kia ora, thank you everyone.